Here's something that might stop you cold. The majority of people who try intermittent fasting and walk away convinced it doesn't work, they weren't wrong about fasting. They were wrong about themselves. They arrived with beliefs so deeply embedded, so quietly assumed to be true that no amount of willpower, discipline, or skipped breakfasts could overcome them. And that's the real problem, not the fasting itself. What you're about to read is not a guide promising you a flat stomach in 30 days. It's not a motivational speech dressed up in scientific language. What this is an honest, detailed account of what's actually happening inside your body when you begin fasting, why the first week feels like war, and why so many people quit right before the moment everything was about to shift. If you've tried intermittent fasting and felt like it failed you, stay with this. If you're about to start, you need this more than any meal plan. And if you're currently fasting and wondering why the results feel slower than you imagined, what you're about to understand will change that completely. This is not about shortcuts. It's about finally understanding the biological conversation your body has been trying to have with you, one hunger signal, one craving, one sleepless night at a time. The biggest lie about intermittent fasting and why almost everyone believes it. There's a story almost everyone tells themselves when they first discover intermittent fasting. It goes something like this. All I have to do is skip a few meals. My body will run out of glucose, flip a switch, and start melting fat. Easy. It's a beautiful story. Clean, logical, simple. It's also almost entirely wrong. The human body is not a machine with a fat-burning mode you can activate by pressing pause on breakfast. It is a biological system shaped by years, sometimes entire decades of habits, emotional eating patterns, sleep disruptions, hormonal fluctuations, and chronic stress. And systems that have been running one way for that long don't simply reprogram overnight because you decided not to eat until noon. Here's the biological reality. For most of your life, your body has been fueled primarily by glucose. Every meal triggers an insulin response. Insulin's job is to escort that glucose into your cells, keep blood sugar stable, and store whatever's left over as glycogen or fat. Over years of regular eating, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, your body has become extraordinarily efficient at this glucose-based system. It knows this fuel. It trusts this fuel. It has literally built its metabolic infrastructure around the assumption that glucose is always coming. When you begin fasting, you cut that supply off, and your body's first instinct is not to celebrate the opportunity to burn fat. Its first instinct is self-preservation. It begins by pulling from its glycogen reserves, stored glucose in the liver and muscles. It raises hunger signals. It sends the brain messages that translate in emotional terms to, "This doesn't feel safe, go back to what you know." And if you respond to those signals, if you eat, the body never gets the memo that things are changing. The fat remains locked. The system stays exactly as it was. This is the first critical misunderstanding, the belief that your body will simply comply, that the hunger is a small inconvenience easily overcome by willpower, that results will appear within days. The shift from glucose burning to fat burning is called metabolic flexibility, and it is not a switch, it is a skill, a biological skill that must be trained, practiced, and earned through consistent repetition over time. Think of it like this. If you had run on gasoline your entire driving life and someone suddenly removed the gas tank and replaced it with an electric battery, the transition wouldn't be instant. Systems would need to recalibrate. New pathways would need to be established. It would feel clunky and inefficient at first, not because the technology doesn't work, but because the infrastructure hasn't been built yet. Your metabolism works exactly the same way. For people who come into fasting with chronically high insulin levels, significant visceral fat, hormonal imbalances from prolonged stress, or poor sleep history, that transition is going to take longer. That's not failure. That's not your body being broken. That's simply your metabolic starting point, and it's a starting point, not a ceiling. The tragedy is that because success stories are almost always edited to remove the struggle, because social media shows only the results and never the adaptation period, people enter fasting expecting one experience and get an entirely different one. When reality doesn't match the fantasy, they don't conclude that their expectations were wrong. They conclude that something is wrong with them. That single misunderstanding, that misalignment between biological reality and social expectation is responsible for more abandoned fasting journeys than any other factor. Fasting is not designed to produce instant transformation. It is a signal, a sustained, consistent signal that allows the body to slowly, intelligently relearn how to manage energy. Every day you maintain the fast, you send that signal a little louder. And eventually, the body responds, not because you forced it to, because you finally gave it enough time to remember what it was always capable of. What nobody tells you about willpower and fasting. Everyone who begins intermittent fasting does so with a quiet belief. This will make me stronger, more disciplined, more in control. They imagine a future self, clear-eyed, unfazed by cravings, no longer ruled by hunger. They imagine willpower as something fasting will generate, like a superpower activated by skipping meals. Neuroscience would like a word. The early days of fasting are not a showcase of willpower. They are something far more humbling, a negotiation between an ancient survival-driven brain and a brand new behavioral pattern. And the brain, at least initially, has no intention of cooperating. Here's why. For years, possibly your entire life, your brain has associated glucose with safety, not just energy, but safety. A consistent fuel supply meant survival. When you suddenly interrupt that supply, the brain doesn't sit back and say, interesting, we're going to burn fat now. It sounds an internal alarm. It floods you with thoughts so convincing, so reasonable sounding that you almost can't argue with them. Just a small snack won't hurt. I'll start properly tomorrow. Maybe I'm just the kind of person whose body doesn't respond well to fasting. I'm too stressed for this today.
These thoughts feel like personal insight. They feel like wisdom. In reality, they are survival circuits, ancient pre-rational neural patterns trying to pull you back to what feels familiar and safe. They are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you are human and that your brain evolved for a world where food scarcity was genuinely dangerous. Willpower itself is also far more fragile than most people realize. It is not a moral quality. It is not something you either have or you don't. Research consistently shows it functions more like a cognitive resource that depletes with use. When you're simultaneously managing work demands, emotional stress, relationship complexity, and the neurological chaos of changing your eating patterns, the willpower reservoir drains fast. And when it's low, every hunger signal feels enormous. Every craving feels urgent, and every internal voice telling you to quit feels very wise. This is why so many beginners turn their early fasting struggles into evidence of personal failure. They conflate biological resistance with character weakness. They look at their constant food thoughts, their irritability, their inability to push through, and they build a story. I don't have what it takes. But here is what's actually happening. A brain undergoing metabolic reorganization, a nervous system learning to reinterpret the absence of glucose as something other than danger, a biological system doing exactly what it is supposed to do when fundamentally new demands are placed on it. Real willpower, the sustainable, durable kind, does not emerge through brute force during chaos. It emerges through stability over time. As fasting becomes more consistent, the brain begins to lower its alarm. It learns that hunger doesn't mean an emergency. Cravings lose their urgency. Hunger shifts from commanding to informational. And at that point, you no longer need enormous reserves of willpower to make it through a fasting window. The biological environment is changed, and with it, the psychological struggle dissolves. Fasting does not make you strong-willed overnight. What it does, more honestly and more usefully, is reveal exactly where food has been serving emotional and psychological functions that have nothing to do with fuel. And that revelation, while uncomfortable, is precisely where the real growth begins. Hunger is not your enemy. It's a message you've misread your entire life. If there is one sensation that causes more people to abandon fasting than any other, it is hunger. Not because hunger is unbearable, but because of the story most people have been told about what it means. Since childhood, most of us were taught that hunger signals danger, low blood sugar, a biological emergency requiring immediate response. If you're hungry, you need to eat, now. This conditioning runs deep. It is woven into meal times, school lunches, parenting habits, cultural norms, and the simple act of always having food available. But modern biological science tells a more nuanced story, and it changes everything. Hunger, particularly in the early days of fasting, is not a distress signal from a body in crisis. It is a transition alert from a body beginning to switch fuel systems. Imagine your body as a building powered by two energy sources, a fast and reliable gas supply and a deeper, more sustainable electrical system. Your whole life, you've run on gas. In biological terms, that gas is glucose, delivered through regular meals. Fasting shuts off the gas valve. The body must now access its electrical system, stored fat converted into ketones for fuel. But the switch doesn't happen instantaneously. First, the body must work through its existing glycogen stores. In that transitional gap, when the gas is low, but the electrical system isn't fully operational yet, hunger appears. Not because you're starving, because your body is mid-transition. The biological mechanism driving that hunger is a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin doesn't operate based on your actual energy levels. It operates based on your eating habits. If you've eaten breakfast at 7:30 every morning for 10 years, ghrelin shows up at 7:30 expecting delivery. This is not a physiological emergency. It is a deeply ingrained biological habit dressed up as hunger. And here is the part that changes things. If you let that hunger wave pass without eating, ghrelin subsides on its own, not because you ate, but because your brain recalibrated. It registered that food wasn't coming and adjusted accordingly. Research shows ghrelin works in pulses, not as a steady climbing signal. Push through the first 15 to 20 minutes of a hunger wave and it passes. Do this consistently over 3 to 4 days, and your brain actually rewires your hunger clock to align with your new eating schedule. The hunger you experience in early fasting is not a warning sign. It is the threshold of adaptation, the doorway between your old metabolic self and your new one. And if you walk through it consistently, patiently, without panic, what awaits on the other side is a clarity and an energy and a relationship with food that most people never experience because they turned back at the door. The moment you stop seeing hunger as the enemy and start seeing it as data, useful biological data about where your body currently is in its transition, fasting stops being a battle and becomes a collaboration. The silent variables that determine whether fasting works or fails. One of the most dangerous misconceptions in the world of intermittent fasting is this, that fasting itself is all that matters, that simply not eating within the designated window is the complete equation, that everything else, sleep, hydration, stress, food quality, is secondary or irrelevant. This belief doesn't just slow your progress, it can actively undermine everything you're working towards. Fasting does not operate in isolation. It operates inside a living, interconnected biological system. And what it actually does, what fasting really is a magnifier. It takes whatever is already present in your lifestyle and amplifies it, the good and the bad. Sleep is perhaps the underestimated variable of all. When you sleep less than 6 or 7 hours consistently, your body responds by elevating cortisol, your primary stress hormone. Cortisol's job, evolutionarily speaking, is to prepare you for threat. Part of how it does that is by raising blood sugar, mobilizing glucose to fuel a rapid response. What this means in practice is that poor sleep actively works against the metabolic shift fasting is trying to create.
It keeps blood sugar fluctuating, it keeps insulin elevated, and it makes the transition to fat burning dramatically harder. Worse, sleep deprivation lowers leptin, the hormone responsible for signaling fullness, and raises ghrelin, the hunger hormone. So even if you're fasting through the morning, your brain is screaming for food, not because it needs it, but because a tired nervous system is generating artificial hunger signals. You break your fast, eat more than you intended, feel sluggish, and conclude that fasting is making you worse. But the fasting isn't the problem, the sleep is. Then there is the matter of hydration and electrolytes, two factors almost universally ignored by beginners. When you fast, you are not just abstaining from calories, you're also cutting off your primary dietary source of sodium, potassium, and magnesium. These minerals are critical for nerve signaling, cellular function, blood pressure regulation, and cognitive clarity. When they drop, and during fasting they drop quickly, the symptoms are immediate and easy to misattribute. Headaches that feel like fasting is starving your brain, dizziness when you stand, a bone-deep fatigue that feels like your body is shutting down, irritability that arrives without obvious cause. Most people experience these symptoms and conclude that fasting is harming them. In almost every case, what they are actually experiencing is dehydration and mineral depletion, entirely preventable and entirely fixable, with 2 liters of water daily in a simple strategy for replenishing electrolytes. A pinch of quality salt, some coconut water, a squeeze of lemon and mineral water. And then there is the eating window itself, the meals you choose to break your fast with. Some people fast for 16 hours and then celebrate by eating processed, nutrient-poor foods that spike insulin, crash blood sugar, and leave them foggy and ravenous the following morning. Fasting does not have magical powers to neutralize poor food choices. Quite the opposite. Because the eating window is compressed, the quality of what goes in matters more, not less. Fasting is a biological mirror. It reflects your lifestyle back at you with unflinching clarity. If you're sleeping poorly, it shows you. If you're eating poorly, it shows you. If you're chronically stressed, it amplifies it. But this is not a flaw. It's one of fasting's most powerful features. It forces you to ask questions you might have been avoiding. Am I actually sleeping enough? Am I eating because I'm hungry, or because I'm bored, or because I'm anxious? Am I treating my body like a system worth investing in, or like something to be pushed through and punished? When fasting is paired with quality sleep, adequate hydration, and nutrient-dense meals, the body responds brilliantly. The metabolic shift accelerates, energy stabilizes, the cognitive clarity people talk about becomes real and tangible. But fasting alone, without those foundational supports, is like trying to build a house with excellent windows and no walls. Why your journey will look nothing like anyone else's, and why that's exactly right. Social media has done something quietly damaging to the world of intermittent fasting. It has turned a deeply individual biological process into a comparison contest. And when personal biology becomes a competition, the only outcome is suffering. Here's what the comparison culture doesn't show you. No 2 people begin fasting from the same biological starting point. Someone with stable insulin, healthy sleep, low chronic stress, good muscle mass, and a history of active living will enter fat-burning mode faster, sometimes dramatically faster, than someone managing insulin resistance, chronic sleep deprivation, ongoing emotional stress, and a sedentary lifestyle. This is not about motivation. It is not about discipline. It is simple biology. The metabolic shift fasting requires, the transition from burning glucose to burning ketones derived from fat, is profoundly influenced by insulin levels. If your insulin is chronically elevated due to years of high carbohydrate eating, stress hormones, or poor sleep, your fat stores are biologically locked. Even in a fasted state, the body cannot freely access them. You will enter that low-energy dead zone, tired, foggy, irritable, and interpret it as fasting not working. But fasting is working. It's just working through more resistance than the person next to you started with. Gender plays a role. Age plays a role.
Hormonal status, particularly for women navigating different phases of their menstrual cycle, plays a significant role. Physical activity history, muscle mass, gut microbiome health, thyroid function, all of these variables influence how quickly the body adapts. And yet, when someone sees a friend lose weight rapidly in the first 2 weeks of fasting, while they feel exhausted and unchanged, the story they tell themselves is always the same. It's not working for me. Maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm broken. But slower adaptation is not inferior adaptation. In biology, rapid, dramatic shifts in response to an intervention are often followed by equally rapid rebounds. The body that takes 3 weeks to begin meaningfully shifting its fuel system is building something durable, something that will outlast the first flush of motivation and the initial excitement. Fasting is not a race with a finish line where faster arrival earns a prize. It is a metabolic reset, a long, patient, deeply personal recalibration of the most complex system you will ever encounter. Every individual needs their own map, their own pacing, their own signals. Stop looking sideways. Start looking inward. Your body has been trying to communicate with you for years. Fasting creates the quiet in which you can finally begin to listen. The hidden hunger and the emotions you've been eating around. There is a kind of hunger so convincing, so physiologically real in how it feels, that even experienced practitioners can mistake it. It arrives not from the stomach, but from the brain. Not from a body running low on fuel, but from an emotional system searching for comfort. This is emotional hunger, and it is one of the least discussed and most powerful variables in the entire fasting equation. Human beings use food for far more than fuel. We use it to mark celebrations, to soften grief, to fill the uncomfortable silence of a boring afternoon, to manage anxiety in the moment before a difficult conversation, or to reward ourselves after a hard day. Over years, this relationship becomes deeply encoded in the brain's reward circuitry. When you feel stressed, bored, lonely, or emotionally drained, your dopamine system activates, and it knows that sugar, fat, and salt reliably produce a dopamine surge. So it simulates hunger. It generates real cravings for real foods that have nothing to do with your actual energy state. Fasting exposes this pattern with unprecedented clarity, because when you stop eating by the clock, you interrupt the automatic cycle. The emotions you've been numbing with food, the anxiety, the restlessness, the sadness, the low-grade loneliness, suddenly have nowhere to go. They surface, and because they surface during fasting, they feel like hunger. They feel like proof that your body can't handle this. Beginners almost universally interpret this as a fasting problem. They ask themselves why they have no willpower, why they can't control their cravings, why they feel so desperate for food even when they know they shouldn't be hungry. And in that questioning, they arrive at the most damaging conclusion of all: something is wrong with me. Nothing is wrong with you. You have simply, over years, developed a deeply conditioned relationship between emotional discomfort and eating. That relationship doesn't dissolve the moment you decide to fast. It surfaces fully intact and demands to be recognized. Neuroscience confirms that emotional hunger can activate the same brain regions as physical hunger, particularly the hypothalamus and amygdala. The felt experience is identical. The cause is entirely different. The pathway through emotional hunger is not suppression. It is not toughing it out. It begins with something far simpler and far more powerful: naming what you're actually feeling. The next time a craving arrives during your fasting window, pause for a moment before reacting. Ask yourself, am I genuinely hungry or am I uncomfortable? Did this craving arrive right after a stressful conversation? What emotion am I hoping food will resolve right now?
The moment you name the emotion, anxiety, boredom, loneliness, stress, something neurologically significant happens. Naming an emotion activates the prefrontal cortex, the rational, reflective part of the brain, and it begins to reduce the amygdala's alarm response. The craving often softens or dissolves entirely without a single bite, not because you suppressed it, but because you addressed what was actually happening.
In this way, fasting becomes something far richer than a dietary strategy. It becomes a practice in emotional literacy, a daily opportunity to understand the difference between what your body needs and what your nervous system is reaching for. And that distinction, once learned, changes not just how you eat, but how you handle everything. The urgency trap. Why rushing fasting guarantees failure. Nothing sabotages a fasting journey faster than treating it like an emergency. It usually begins with a specific goal, a vacation in 6 weeks, a wedding in 3 months, a number on the scale that has become the measure of self-worth. And with that goal comes an urgency that distorts everything. The eating window shrinks from 16 to 8 to 20 to 4, then OMAD, then extended multi-day fasts. The thinking is linear. More fasting equals faster results. The body does not think linearly. When you push your body into increasingly aggressive restriction without adequate preparation, without sufficient nourishment in the eating window, without the supporting framework of sleep and stress management, your body activates a survival response that is the precise opposite of what you want. Metabolism slows, cortisol rises. The body begins hoarding energy, holding onto fat with particular tenacity, and breaking down muscle for fuel instead. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do when it believes resources are critically scarce: protect itself. And then, the scale, which was supposed to be moving, stalls, or moves in the wrong direction. And the conclusion drawn is that harder fasting is required, so the window shrinks further, calories drop lower, exercise intensity increases, more cardio, heavier lifting, longer sessions, attempting to force results that the body is biologically resistant to producing. This is the urgency trap. The harder you push, the more the body braces. The more the body braces, the more frustrated you become. The more frustrated you become, the more likely you are to abandon the whole endeavor and conclude once again that fasting doesn't work. But fasting was never working against you. Your urgency was. Here's what the early stages of fasting actually produce, before the scale shows anything meaningful. Improved mental clarity, as the brain begins to run on ketones and experiences their neuroprotective effects. Better digestion, as the gut gets its first genuine rest period in years. Reduced evening cravings, as ghrelin begins to recalibrate. Deeper, more restorative sleep, steadier energy across the day without the peaks and crashes of glucose dependence. These are not side effects, they are milestones. They are the body communicating that the process is working, but they are invisible on a scale. And if the scale is the only instrument you're watching, you will miss every single one of them. Fasting is a process of rebuilding trust between you and your biology. The body that has been pushed, crash-dieted, over-exercised, stressed, and sleep-deprived for years will not release fat easily the moment you begin fasting aggressively. It will first need to believe that it is safe, that nourishment is reliable, that rest is forthcoming, that it is not under attack. Lead with patience and biological respect, and the body will eventually show you what it's truly capable of. Lead with pressure and deadlines, and it will retreat further inward every single time. Why the fasting window you choose matters far less than you think. Perhaps no single topic generates more confusion and more unnecessary self-doubt in fasting communities than the question of which window to use. 16 to 8, 18 to 6, 20 to 4, OMAD, extended fasting. The options multiply endlessly, and with them, the stories. Someone's friend lost 20 pounds in 3 weeks on OMAD. A comment section is full of people swearing that anything less than 18 hours is barely worth doing. A popular figure claims their mental performance quadrupled on a 20-hour fast. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, you sit with your 16 to 8 window, feeling like maybe you're not doing it right, not doing it enough, not committed enough, not disciplined enough. Here is the truth that most conversations in this space fail to center. Fasting windows are tools. They are not trophies. They are not a willpower hierarchy. They are structural frameworks, starting points for building metabolic flexibility. And the right one for you is the one that aligns with where your biology currently is, not where someone else's is. Your body does not read clocks. It responds to internal signals. insulin levels, cortisol rhythms, sleep-wake cycles, metabolic state. Cramming yourself into an 18-hour window when your insulin regulation is still unstable, your sleep is poor, and your stress hormones are elevated doesn't make you more advanced, it makes you more miserable, and it slows the very adaptation you're hoping to accelerate. Metabolic flexibility, the body's capacity to shift efficiently between glucose and fat as fuel sources, is a trainable biological skill. Like any skill, it develops at a pace determined by the individual's starting point, consistency, and supporting conditions. You cannot rush it by extending your fasting window before your body is ready, any more than you can force a language learner to be fluent by throwing them into increasingly difficult conversations before they've built foundational vocabulary. Begin where you are. If 16 to 8 feels manageable, stay there and optimize the quality of your eating window before you consider extending the fast. If you're well-rested, well-hydrated, and your food quality is strong, you can experiment with 18 to 6 and see how your body responds. Then, listen carefully. Are you foggy? That's a signal from your glucose regulation system, not a sign you need to push harder. Are you shaky or irritable? Your electrolytes or sleep may need attention before your window changes. These are data points. They are your body's feedback system. When you learn to read them instead of dismissing them, fasting stops being a rigid protocol you're either succeeding or failing at and becomes an adaptive practice, one that evolves with you rather than against you. The counterintuitive truth about eating during your window. Here is one of fasting's most ironic traps: the fear of eating. It sounds absurd on the surface. Someone begins intermittent fasting, experiences some early success, feels a sense of control and discipline, and then, gradually, begins to believe that eating during the eating window is somehow undoing the work, that the less they eat, the better, that the eating window should be treated as an opportunity for additional restriction, not genuine nourishment. This is not discipline. This is the beginning of a physiological crisis dressed up as commitment. When you consistently undereat during your eating window, especially when protein and healthy fats are absent, the body responds with a cascade of hormonal disruptions. Leptin drops, making it almost impossible to feel genuinely satisfied. Ghrelin rises, generating relentless hunger even immediately after eating. Cortisol elevates, driving cravings for sugar and dense caloric foods, disrupting sleep and increasing anxiety. Muscle tissue begins to break down as the body searches for amino acids it isn't receiving from food. Metabolism slows as the body registers sustained inadequate intake and shifts further into conservation mode. And then, inevitably, comes the binge, the breaking point where the body, starved of genuine nourishment for too long, overrides every intention and drives an eating episode that feels completely out of control, followed, of course, by shame, and then more restriction. And so the cycle continues, each rotation pulling you further from health and further from trust in yourself. A first meal, rich in vegetables, quality protein, and healthy fats, does not spike insulin dramatically. It stabilizes blood sugar, sustains satiety for hours, supports metabolic function through the afternoon, and signals to your nervous system that this is a sustainable, nourishing pattern, not a punitive one. Your body releases fat when it feels safe, not when it's afraid, not when it's starving, not when it's sending cortisol surging through your system because adequate nourishment hasn't arrived for too long. Eat. Eat well. Eat intentionally. Let your meals reclaim their proper role, not as the enemy, not as a reward to be earned through suffering, but as essential, intelligent nourishment that makes everything else possible. The tripod of fasting: why sleep and hydration are not optional. Imagine a three-legged stool. You remove one leg and it collapses. This is the structure of effective fasting. Fasting itself is one leg. Sleep is the second. Hydration and electrolytes are the third. Remove either of the latter two, and the entire practice becomes dramatically harder, less effective, and far more likely to be abandoned. Sleep, in particular, is not a supportive add-on to fasting. It is a biological partner to it. During sleep, the body performs the cellular repair, hormonal recalibration, and metabolic housekeeping that fasting is partly designed to support. Growth hormone, which plays a significant role in fat metabolism and muscle preservation, is released primarily during deep sleep. The circadian rhythm that governs insulin sensitivity, cortisol patterns, and hunger hormones operates on a schedule that quality sleep regulates and poor sleep dismantles. When you sleep 7 to 9 hours consistently, your blood sugar enters the next day more stable. Your hunger hormones are better balanced. Your cortisol follows a healthy arc, high in the morning for alertness, low in the evening for rest. Your brain is less likely to generate artificial hunger signals. Fasting against this backdrop feels manageable, even natural. When you sleep 5 hours or less, you enter fasting carrying a cortisol spike, unstable blood sugar, elevated ghrelin, and suppressed leptin. Everything is harder. Every hunger wave feels more urgent. Every craving feels more commanding, and the willpower you would need to navigate all of that is operating at reduced capacity precisely because the brain that generates it is exhausted. The solution is not complicated. It is simply prioritized. 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep consistently in a dark and cool environment with consistent sleep and wake times that align with natural light. This is not luxury. It is the non-negotiable biological foundation on which everything else is built. Hydration and electrolytes operate on a similar principle of being quietly critical and widely ignored. 2 liters of water daily, minimum during fasting periods, supplemented with sodium, a small pinch of quality salt and water, or naturally in mineral water, along with potassium from sources like coconut water and magnesium from supplementation if necessary. These interventions are simple, inexpensive, and profoundly impactful. The headache that was convincing you fasting was harming you often dissolves within 20 minutes of proper electrolyte replenishment. The morning hunger that felt unbearable often turns out to be thirst that the brain misread, a very common and very correctable phenomenon. Fasting, sleep, and hydration are a tripod. Each one reinforces the others. All 3 together create the biological environment in which genuine transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Exercise during fasting. Why timing is everything. When most people hear that fasting can accelerate fat loss, their first instinct is to combine it with intense exercise. The logic seems sound. Fasting depletes glucose, exercise burns fuel, therefore fasting plus exercise equals maximum fat burning. The reality is more nuanced, and getting it wrong is one of the most reliable ways to feel terrible during fasting and conclude that the practice is making you worse. In the early stages of fasting, the first 2 to 3 weeks, the body is still in metabolic transition. Glycogen stores are not fully depleted. Ketone production is not yet efficient. You are, in metabolic terms, between fuel stations, and this is not the moment to demand peak athletic performance. High-intensity interval training, heavy compound lifting, and sustained intense cardio all rely primarily on glucose and glycogen as fuel. When those resources are limited and the alternative, ketones, fat-derived ketones, is not yet reliably available, performance drops, cramping becomes more common, dizziness can occur, and recovery is significantly impaired. You push through a hard workout feeling weak and shaky, eat more than you intended during the eating window to compensate, sleep poorly from the physiological stress, and wake up the next morning convinced that fasting is incompatible with an active lifestyle. But the problem isn't fasting, it's the timing and intensity of exercise relative to your current metabolic state. In the early adaptation phase, the most biologically appropriate exercise is low-intensity movement. Brisk walking, gentle cycling, light resistance work, yoga, mobility-focused sessions. These forms of movement support the metabolic shift, improve insulin sensitivity, and enhance fat oxidation without placing demands on a glucose system that is currently in flux. Studies consistently show that low-intensity fasted movement increases fat oxidation significantly compared to the same movement in a fed state. The word low intensity does not mean ineffective, it means aligned.
As your body adapts to fasting, typically after 2 to 4 weeks, depending on your individual metabolic starting point, you can begin to reintroduce higher intensity work. At that point, your fat-burning machinery is more fully operational, your energy systems are more efficient, and your body can handle increased demand without triggering a stress response that undermines progress. The golden principle here is one that applies to fasting in its entirety. Fat-burning goals pursued through self-punishment slow down results. When physical or caloric stress is excessive, cortisol rises, insulin response becomes disrupted, and the body stores fat, particularly abdominal fat, more aggressively as a protective measure. The very outcome you're working towards becomes harder to reach the harder you push in the wrong direction. Fasting and exercise done in intelligent alignment are not opposing forces. They are complementary practices that together can reset your body's entire energy management system, improve cardiovascular efficiency, enhance cognitive function, and build a relationship with physical movement that is sustainable rather than punishing. Let them work together, not against each other. The one thing that determines whether you stay or quit. You can have the science, you can have the perfect eating window, the right foods, the appropriate exercise, the sleep dialed in, the electrolytes replenished. You can have every technical variable optimized, and you will still quit if you don't have a why. This is the part of the fasting conversation that almost no one wants to have because it's not about biology, it's about meaning. And meaning is harder to quantify, harder to optimize, harder to sell. But it is the variable that more than any other determines whether someone is still fasting 6 months from now or abandon the practice in week 2. Fasting by its nature is uncomfortable at times. There will be hunger waves. There will be mornings when the craving for breakfast is nearly overwhelming. There will be social situations that feel awkward because you're not eating when everyone else is. There will be days when stress is high, sleep was short, and the entire biological environment is working against you. If the only reason you started fasting is because it's trending or because you want to drop a specific number of pounds before a specific date, every one of those uncomfortable moments will present itself as a perfectly reasonable justification for stopping. I've been working hard. It's just one meal. I can restart tomorrow. And tomorrow becomes next week, and next week becomes never. But when fasting is anchored to something real, something personal, something that matters to you at a level deeper than aesthetics, those difficult moments look entirely different. I want to sleep through the night without waking at 3 a.m. wired and anxious. I want to feel clear-headed in the morning without relying on caffeine to function. I want to understand why I've used food to manage my emotions for as long as I can remember and find a different way. I want to feel like I'm in a collaborative relationship with my body instead of constantly fighting it. I want my children to see what it looks like to approach your health with patience and respect. These are not aesthetic goals, they are deeply human ones, and they do not evaporate when a hunger wave arrives or a stressful week derails your routine. Purpose doesn't make fasting easy. Nothing makes it easy, particularly in the beginning, but purpose makes every difficulty meaningful. Hunger is no longer random suffering, it is a signal you now understand. Fatigue is not failure, it is a request from your body that you've learned to interpret. Emotional cravings are no longer evidence of weakness, they are a window into a conditioning pattern you are actively dismantling. With purpose, you don't need external validation to continue. You don't need the scale to move this week or the compliments to come or the visible results to appear before you believe something is working. Because you are connected to something the scale cannot measure. The daily, quiet, accumulating evidence that you are learning to listen to your body rather than override it. One day at a time, one hunger wave at a time, one deeper understanding at a time. What this journey is really